A very major philosopher of the 20th century said, mostly death is loss, which teaches us about the worth of things. So that the very issue of loss is what teaches us about the value of things. And, we all know that if we want to avoid loss, avoid anything that you care about. Because who would live a life not caring? Not that we could anyway, but some people do. Some people manage to disconnect enough to not care. So the other thing I was thinking just briefly is, that, God, Brett's life was, really cut short. And then I was wondering about that issue of cut short of what? Who holds the stopwatch on what we call living a full life or having a life cut short? And, and I was realizing that life is cut short of our stories about what someone's life should be, about our hopes and dreams as parents, as friends, of what life should really be. The dreams are cut short. And so we go on dreaming and thinking a year, 5 years down the line, geez, if Britt had stayed alive by now, or if anyone we love stayed alive, if our dog had stayed alive, But our memories are not cut short. And our life is full of memories. And so the last day or two, I've been kind of rummaging through my vault of memories, which are as infinite as the memories I have of my own life. I think of my life and stories, and I like stories. And for every story I have about myself, I have a story about Brett. And I thought that's really interesting. One doesn't have that many stories about that many people, one of the things this morning that came to me was when Brett was a little child, and he was going to bed at night, and he'd ask me to read to him, and I would read to him, and over he would ask me, tell me the misty, moisty one. And this is when he was 3 or 4, and the whole thing went one misty, moisty morning when cloudy was the weather. I chanced to meet an old man, clad all in leather. And he began to ask me, and I began to grin, how do you do? And how do you do? And how do you do? Again. And I was just thinking about that simple, crazy little nursery rhyme that he loved. Said so much, I think, about a certain nicety, a certain civility in life. How do you do, and how do you do, and how do you do again? That he liked to hear that. And I left it on to him. And sometimes I'd want to say, Jesus Christ, Brett, I know a lot of other nursery rhymes. But that's the one he wanted. The Carvel or this, he wanted that. And so we got a lot of that. And and I was thinking also here about bringing the ashes down. And as I was bringing the ashes, thinking, this is Brett's body. This is what's left of a body. This is what's left of his son. And it seemed very strange, except I understand that it's not strange in a way, but I've always been fascinated by every religion has their traditions around death and dying, and how they treat and how they wash and how they tend to the body, and I thought that's really great. I'm not a person who has any particular beliefs of those regards, but I could certainly respect, like in Hindu tradition, washing the body, the family gets together, and for just the act of touching, the act of being palpable. And I thought the ashes are palpable. And I said to Mom that this is only half the ashes, and how heavy they are. I would not have expected them to be that heavy, and yet I know ashes. As a doctor, I know the body. And so we don't really have a ritual. And when I thought of digging a hole, so we dug a hole, and I dug it, and it's rough to dig here, there's roots of these trees, and when 2 nights ago, I said, that's not enough. I got to go down and redig the hole. I've got to go and find the rock. I can't just dig a fucking hole. Even if it's a hole, I've got to really tend to it as I would for the body. And so I did it, and I looked for a stone, and I trimmed around it, and planted this plant that we took from Brett's deck right after he died, rather than let the plants out there die, And so we find ourselves right here, dealing with that old ashes to ashes, which I always loved as a kid. I didn't understand it all, but I always had a very deep fascination with death and dying. All my art, all my writing was always about that. And my own fears and concerns about mortality and trying to understand it, understanding that it's the one thing in life that's certain. It's the only thing in life that is life, much as life is death. And so there's no getting off that thing we have to face, of loss. And I remember when I was writing, when I was younger, a lot of what I wrote about was death, and I wrote something about death that said, order is in the eyes of dead men. Envision divine disorder. Then I realized that the only order you get is when you're dead. As we live, it's always disorder, and maybe that's the divine. Maybe the nature of creation itself is the disorder of it, and in that sense, if we're looking for anything spiritual, it's in the very nature of things. It's in the ashes, it's in the stone, it's in the dog, it's the distractions, the pumps. It doesn't exist in some perfect condition. Love doesn't exist as a perfect condition. It exists as a human condition with all the flaws and difficulties of it. So Brett very much loved his friends and loved his families. Loved his dogs, his bulldogs, loved his Carvels, loved his opinions. He was very, attached to things in that sense. And in that sense, he was not perfect like all of us, but he was humanly imperfect. There is no perfect like all of us. We're all imperfect. It's the fundamental nature of being human. And I remember coming upon that when I was writing, when I was around 20, and writing a line about to fly to gods who beat the sky, to curse my flaws, peculiar perfection. I realized then that what I was fighting against in my life was my flaws, but my flaws were the very perfection I saw. The idea you get rid of your imperfections and then you'll be perfect is like hell, because it just means we're wrong with ourselves all the time. And that's true of loss and true of death too. And I think with Brett, we talked about this stuff. If there's anything in my life I feel like maybe we didn't talk about things enough, or maybe Brett didn't want to talk about these things that much, but he did. We did. We had that. But we were close, in our own flawed way. But we were still very close. We were father and son. We loved each other. We got angry with each other. We felt disapproved by each other. I remember flying out to California or Milwaukee when I was a sculptor, and he must have been 5 at the time, so it was back at 76 or so. And I remember getting on the plane and feeling a little guilty. I was away from him and feeling such love for him and missing him. And I sat and wrote letters to him on the plane. And I realized the letters were like I would have written to an adult, like to a friend, not to a 5-year-old. But they were meant to a 5-year-old. And I mailed them back and assumed whoever I was living with at the time, there was an array of people, would read it to him, and he would understand it. And he did. And he mentioned to me along the ways of, Dad, do you remember the letters you used to write to me? He couldn't remember what they were about, but he remembered I wrote him letters. And there was something in them which was more than, how you doing, you're being a good boy, Because I felt that being a father, there's a lot more to write about. So the work of love is to bear these truths about who we are in the world and what we get and what we give. And I think Brett, as a human being, really did struggle with those things. And I sometimes feel more than ask the questions like I tend to do, Brett just directly lived into the answer. He just loved to be around the people he loved. He loved to care for the dogs. He loved to care for the birds. He built these elaborate bird houses with pulleys. He went out to chase the ones that chased the birds. He protected the wounded creatures. You know, he let the foxes in his backyard. He really took care of the people he loved, me, his grandmother, my Uncle Pete, who is not the easiest person to talk to sometimes every day. He's out in California, but that's like every day since Pete's life died. He really understands Pete's alone and can use my calls. And he and Pete have a wonderful relationship. Brother Fred, his cousins, the dogs, I mean, Brett, as you guys know, Brett love family, so it is. And he often said to me, we had a big party for my mother, I think when she was 75. And I invited all my family, because I hadn't seen them in 30 years. A lot of people can remember Bob up there. It's really a fun party. And Brett said, Dad, where have these people been all my life? They're all so nice. Why have you kept the family around? And all I said was, I really didn't work at doing that. I like them too, but when people go their own ways, especially these days, they're all over the world, the country, you know. But Brett, I always felt really valuable. And, I really sought that in friends, like we were talking about before. You know, seeking that in a friendship is my brother. You know, Brett didn't have it. When Brett was a kid, you know, he would say, Dad, can I have a friend over? I said, yeah, you can have 3 friends. And next thing I know, there were 33 friends. And they were all sleeping in his room with the dogs. At night, I'd go in there, because I gave Brett a lot of leeway, just like I had leeway as a kid. And he loved it. And I couldn't believe it. I walked in there, they were all suffocating. They looked like they were piled on the blankets on each other, on the beds, you know. But I think Brett loved a lot of that childhood. Brett's passion for things was very strong. When Brett liked something, like we were talking about, it was hard to keep him away from it. And one of the things he liked when I was a kid, we planted a garden, Emily and I, when we first got up here, and raised tomatoes. So Brett was 2, maybe 3. Couldn't have been 3. I think we separated them. Whoever I was with at that time, and Brett called the little tomatoes on the thing panunis. He didn't have nice tomatoes. He said, I'm going to get panunis. And I keep saying the panunis aren't ripe yet. And he said, I want panunis. I said, well, you got to wait till they're ripe. But of course, you go out there the next morning to get it, and they're never ripe panunis, because Brett ate them all. And he would go out, and no matter how many times I told him, he would go and eat the green tomatoes, so you never get a ripe one. And one day I saw some that were going to be ripe by the end of the day, and I remember thinking, at the end of the day, I'm going to go out and get them. And I went out, and they were gone. And I got really angry with him. And I said to him, I said, it's not okay that you eat them all. They're not all yours. They're mine. And it hurts my feelings. And since you hurt me, and he had a little G.I. Joe toy, and I said, then I'm going to hurt you. And I broke his G.I. Joe toy. It's the only time I ever did something like that. It was an impulse, and after I felt horrible. But, to the day he was all, he used to say to me,
never ate another
potato. He ate the tomatoes, but he'd say, Dad, do you remember the time you really lost it? You broke my G.I. Joe toy? And I said, yes, I did.
All the things I wish I knew.
Yes. And he said to me, I can't believe you. He said, you're just not an angry person. And I said, but at that moment, I really wanted those tomatoes. Anyway, it was like that. So we had a kind of nice engagement around that. And one other time, we had one rule in the place up there, because that was you can't go down to the pond alone. We had 2 ponds and 25 acres, and you'd never go down alone. And one day he had his friend Rebecca over, and I looked and I didn't see them. And I started getting into a panic and running around, and a lot of woods and a lot of this. So right away I made a beeline first to the lake, and they weren't there, and then to the pond, figuring that's the real danger, in the woods. And I went down, and they both stand in the water up to their ankles. Just kids, 4 years old. And I walked right up, and I was so relieved to find him, and so angry. Well, not angry, but so pissed off that he had put me through such agony that I said, this is the one rule, you're never to come to this pond. And I gave him a whack on the ass. Not a hard whack. A whack on the ass, and he looked at me so startled. And he looked at me for about 20 seconds and he started crying. And then he used to bring that up too. Do you remember you hit me for being in the pond? And I said, yes, and you deserved it. But anyway, we have this kind of thing, which I think is what love is. Love is not always about saying yes to somebody. It's about saying no. It's about having limits. It's knowing you can't say yes because nothing's enough for anybody anyway, and you can't always say no because all you're doing is telling them you know how they should live their life better than they do. But when you don't know the answers to these, then you struggle the best you can to love in a balanced way. Work with Brett with that, and we had that. I think we tried to love in a balanced way, and Brett was very much his own person, very headstrong. Lorna would say to me sometimes, God, how does he come from you? You're so different. And it's true, we're very different people in some ways, but in certain visceral ways, like in Who's Going to Win the Battle of the Panunis, we were the same, and I remember when Brett was in high school and wanted a car. I bought him an old Jeep, which he loved. And it was his first car. But then a year later, I think he was a senior, and he wanted another car. And Dad, I got him, no, the first car was not the Jeep. That's what I eventually got him. It was a Honda, nice, not an earlier one, from a friend that was used. And he said, I need a better car. He said, the girls, they date all the guys with the nice cars. And, and I really need it. And will you buy me one? And I said, let me think about it. And I was a sculptor then. I was driving a battered old pickup and working really hard to kind of get my career off the ground. And I remember saying, Brett, no, I'm not going to buy you that car now. I bought you a car last year. You how persuasive, how Brett could argue to get his way. I mean, you got in front of a bull elephant. And he starts pushing the tusks. And finally he said, Dad, you're not listening to me. And I'd say, Brett, I'm listening to you. And the answer is no. Well, you may be listening, but you're not hearing me. I said, Brett, I'm hearing you. And the answer is no. And he was so upset. I remember he said, and I thought you loved me. I said, I love you. And the answer is no. And I remember that as one of the battles that I won. And I don't mean I won it over him. I won it within myself. To be a father means when you love someone, you've got to say no sometimes. Not because you don't love, but because you can't. No one gets what they want all the time in this world. None of us do. And even if we get it, we're not happy anyway. What Thackeray wrote, Veritas Vanitorum, who of us gets his way in the world is, who's happy in this world, and which of us who gets his way is happy anyway. So anyway, Brett was very close to me and to his mom, and we separated when he was young. And the nice thing about Em and I think for Brett, is always encouraged him to respect his mom, to love his mom, to go with his mom, and I think he probably did a similar thing. And so there was never a tug of war, there was never jealousy, Some days he'd say, it's really boring right here, I'd rather go to, I said, go to your mom's. Or he sometimes would call, Dad, I want to come home, mom's a pain in the ass. I said, I'm sorry, you can't come home because you're a pain in the ass. Parents are pains in the ass, and you just got to learn how to deal with it. And so, we had a family that was just, separated in that sense. But that early separation, was a part of Brett's life, and Brett's life was very rich, and yet, like all of us, he had his insecurities, his needs, vulnerabilities, which all of you who knew Brett knew were there. And like all of us, he found ways to sometimes cover them up and hide them, and that's where he could become very determinedly stuck in a place that he wasn't going to give in, because to give in means to not be right. To not be right means you're not of any value. And these are issues of all our lives. And Brett dying at 47 was in the process of still growing. I think it's one of the saints, I don't remember, maybe St. Stephen, whoever the hell St. Stephen was. I think it was a very early saint. And in writing about him, I don't know, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, someone said, when Stephen died at very young, I think at 21, 20, he was martyred. They were all martyred in those days, And the Bible says, and yet he was full of years. And I always loved that idea that we're full of the years we live. you live to 10, you live to 18, you live to 47, 100. We're still, our choice is to be full of the years or live our time and not be full of the years. And one thing I'll say about Brett, he lived his time pretty fully. Not always easily, like all of us, not always happy like all of us, struggling like all of us, but full in a way. He found a way, and I always admired that in Brett, and always thought, maybe that's what he got from me, that he does better than I do. He finds a way to deal with the disappointments and sense of things that didn't work out his way, probably better than I'm able to. And I could say that because, I didn't maybe have those falls and stuff, and maybe that's why I can be very pious about, oh, come on, get it together, but I think I avoided them assiduously, and I think that he fell into some of those things, and they were really difficult times, and he endured, and he grew, and I think at 47, 48, by, the time he died a few weeks ago, Brett was really opening a new door on his life. He really had a new balance and equilibrium, and that's where it ended. Emily Dickinson wrote about death is one of the things I wanted to just mention because I like them, and said, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves. And immortality. We slowly drove. He knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. And it goes on. But when I look at Brett's life, in a way, I think of all he had to live. In other ways, as a friend said to me, but Ernie, because I was saying we just finished a kitchen and this, and now we had a stone wall we're going to do. And he loved it. He loved his projects. And a friend said, yeah, but Ernie, think of how fulfilled he was, that he really got it all done. That he did build his thing, that it did come out, that you were there with him and his friends, and he'd gone back on Facebook a few weeks before. He'd been off it for years because I think he felt he didn't want to be out there. He didn't feel okay enough about something about the way his life was being lived, and he did. And maybe that's it, it's that old Hausman poem I remember as a kid, which was very paradoxical, to an athlete dying young. And he talks about a great athlete in Greece, one of the first Olympics, who died at 21. Never losing a race, never failing, never getting old, never having to deal with that. But he went out on top. And I remember all my life that thought, can you die at 21, an Olympic star, and say, okay, then things are fine because you've accomplished in a way everything. And I do feel that with Brett. I feel much more peace that he had gotten the kitchen done, gotten his first walls done, grew his things, fed the birds, than that he, at the last minute, might say, I never got to these things. Got to friendships, he got to love, and got to all these things. I wish it were otherwise, of course. I wrote something else which I was reminded of in thinking of Brett. And the last day or two, thinking of things about death and dying, in my own writings, of course, I was so involved. And I wrote this, I guess, when I was 20, 22. And it said, so young to be so old, to see and re-see each sea rise, to eye the sharpest secret of the deed. Come, death, revise me, carve me live, reseed me deep. And there were things I knew, and in a way, I guess I could look at putting Brett's ashes into the ground by this pond. It's like reseeding somebody. It's like planting them, because that's what I believe, and I think probably from my talkings with Brett, who was not a religious person, something Brett believed, that you continue on in some way. Nothing is ever gone from our universe. It just arises in different ways. It's renewed through other processes, you know. And I take a lot of comfort in that, and I think Brett did too. Um, I remember Brett, as he got older, one day he was on the ski team at New Paltz, and Brett had never been a skier. He started cross-country skiing, and it's one of his admired. Brett said, I want to go on the ski team, and he went out and taught himself the cross-country. Next time he's on the ski team. And he wasn't a great skier, but he was good enough to make the varsity. And one day, the winters were very cold here in the early 80s. They went on a big ski touring race around Mohawk, you know, and they set off. And I wasn't there. I was in my studio most of the time. Besides, there's nothing to see. You stand at the finish line. And with someone else, he went with some friends, parents, whatever. And at the end of the race, all of a sudden the phone rings. And they said, we can't find Brett. And the race had ended. And it was going to be 0 that night. Those nights, it was that time of year, you used to get a 0, below 0. And he had, you know, a thin racing suit on. And so they were worried, and they called, you know, the rescue squads and all this, because, you know, there's a lot of trails in Mohawk that you could be on. And Mohawk was not a flourishing hotel then. It was like, you know, anyway, long story short, an hour or two later, I was there with them, comes out of the woods. Someone found him there in their horns, and they got him. And, you know, and he was fine. And I said, you okay? And he said, yeah. He said, I just didn't know where I was for a while. You know. But he kind of had that. He kind of had that, you know, and I admired that in him. You know, I really admired it. It was the strength and the courage, and sometimes belied his not feeling so confident about himself. There was another thing of that sort. We got into rap music very young, and formed a rap group with some of his friends in high school. And they sang in the auditoriums, and you know, Josh, Kevin, and a group of them. And rap was new, and he started playing rap music in his room. I was just like noise to me, and the house was small, and Brett had a big way of doing things real loud, and so we began to get into this about the rap music, and finally I said, look, you know, you're free to love what you want to do, but you can't put it out all over the house. I don't have to love it, and it's just not my thing. And so anyway, he sang his rap music, and I really felt an obligation to learn about rap music, because the fact I didn't like it or get it, to me was simply like I hadn't grown up with it. I remember my father was that way when Elvis Presley came out. What are you doing listening to shit? This isn't music, and what's in the sky? And, you know, it's crazy shit. And, you know, I think every generation has that, but anyway, one day I remember I read a review in the Times on rap music by whoever the music critic in the Times was. And he was one of the great music reviewers. John Pirelli's name. He was there for many, many years. And it was a very extraordinary positive sense of rap as the new poetry, that this is basically where the spoken word, the written word was now really coming out in our culture. And I read it, and I cut it out, and I framed it and gave it to Brett. Because I wanted him to know that the fact that it wasn't my music or I didn't know it doesn't mean it's not wonderful stuff, and that other people don't know it. And I wanted him to see that people who know a hell of a lot more about music than I did really love it and cherish it and put it up there with Shakespeare. And just like recently, Ennio Morricone, who writes the music, wrote all these film scores, including all the film scores for the Italian spaghetti westerns with Clint Eastwood and stuff. And there's a big article at Times by one of the music professors who wrote that he considers Morricone as great as Bach or Beethoven or anyone in his generation who is considered great. That he writes the most extraordinary stuff that people remember, like they remember the tune of a great Bach sonata or something. And I remember, I always loved the music he wrote. And I loved the music from Fistful of Dollars. And actually, and then, maybe we'll just close on this, but just one little other thing I want to say, but I've written a piece called Titoli, which is one of the names of one of the pieces in that Morricone wrote for Fistful of Dollars, which Brett and I, at some point along the way, used to hum together. Of course, it was, and you would recognize if you saw it. It's an astonishing piece of music, and the poem Titoli, which I remember reading to Brett. Again, probably wrote it in the 70s, and it said, "Time runs past every shadow. His whip cracking, the horse's feet hurl sand back into the dry air. Galloping is the logic of balance. The rider, balanced in rhythm with the galloping feet, cracking the sand, spurs the horse on. Balance is the logic of space. Galloping across the sky, his whip cracks in rhyme. With the shadow, his cape lost in time. Shadows are the logic of horsemen." And so I feel with Brett, would always have his shadow, and he cast a large shadow. When he was around, you knew it, one way or the other. And he always told me he's so shy and anxious socially, and he was in his ways. And yet, when he would come out, everyone would say, "Oh God, I make you say he's so wonderful, he's so warm." I'd say, "Brett, there's something wrong here." And maybe he gets high sometimes, I don't know. But there's something wrong. I said, "How can you be so shy in this?" And I know you are. I know it's true. And yet, when you're out, you engage people so easily. And well, people really love you. And I don't know what the answer to that was. But I think Brett worked very hard at parts of his life. And I think that is a testimony to his real strength. And on his house he worked hard, with his friendships he worked hard, with his dogs he worked hard, with his family. A few months ago now, probably about 10 months, he asked me how I'm doing with my drawings. I said, "Well, I'm drawing and I'm excited about them." And I would show him work occasionally, not that often, but occasionally. He really loved to see stuff, helped me out a lot, printing them and mailing things out. And then I said at one point, and I do all of these on a little table in a little space that's probably no more than 8 by 6 feet. He said, "Well, what's your table?" And I said, "Well, I got 2 sawhorses. I got a piece of plywood and I had cardboard on it. And I put box on the cardboard to get the paper up so I don't have to bend over." And he said, "Well, you're out of your mind." The next thing I knew, a week later, comes a package of a big table and a big chair, which is still unopened in there. Of course, he was going to come then, that was part of the deal. He'll help me do it. And we never somehow got around to it. But that's what Brett was like. What Brett was like, and when he felt there was a need with his grandmother, with his mother, who he drove to Rochester, went up near there to breed one of the dogs. Brett would marry and his grandmother in Jersey, drive down and drive into the city, and he never complained about it. He sometimes, like all of us, he'd say, "Oh, it's a pain in the neck, but I got to do it." And Brett did that. Brett was a really good friend, a loyal friend. I remember him telling me once he had to get up in the middle of the night and drive to a jailhouse somewhere to bail one of his friends out who was pulled over for DWI or something. They wouldn't let him drive back again. And the kid wasn't even a good friend. He'd been a friend of Brett's from years before. But that's what Brett would do. He would drop everything and really be there. And that's one of his most endearing qualities, his love of birds, his love of the walls, his love of family and people, I don't know there's much more that's worth remembering about any of us except that we loved. So, in a way, the last thing is when Brett passed away, I not only felt I lost a son, I felt like I lost a father. Because as I get older, I looked at Brett like a father. He was taking care of me. I could tell him to move the stone, to dig a hole, for a table, for help on the computer. And he was always there. He was there like my father was for me when I was a young child. And now that Brett's gone, I miss him not only as a son, but I miss him as someone who's getting old. Look at that. The bird hawk just we have 2 green herons also nested right in this tree. And all the time we've been here, during the COVID thing, I thought of those as, with Brett's interest in birds and bird books and all he got into, was we take care of birds and love them. I saw the mating herons, and then the 2 of them had babies, and they fly around the area. Not in a literal sense has anything to do with Brett, and I don't believe, but it's just emblematic of how Brett's enthusiasm for birds somehow connects to the fact that this time, of all the times of my life, green herons, of which I've probably only seen a half a dozen in 30 or 40 years, were nesting right here, literally right outside off our porch. So,
maybe Kim and Jean would like
yes,
to
if you guys want to say something, let me just turn it up to you, Mona. Well, if you'd ever like to, you're always welcome to come back and do it. We know where Brett's going to be. I know how much he loved everybody here, and how important everybody was there. So, okay. So,
I have something to
yes,
say.
okay, yes, this is.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
Yeah.
I would just say that I have many regrets about my relationship with Brett. As we all know, he could be stubborn, and but I always sort of foresaw that a time would come when we would be able to talk to each other in a kinder way. And I'm sorry that didn't come to pass. But I do have something if I can stand up.
Watch the edges.
Should I come down to do it or can I do it?
You want to put that?
No.
You want? I could do it. You can come down if you want. But
Yeah,
just let me get you better because that's a bit of a step.
Okay. I should be good.
Okay.
I wrote him a note.
Okay. You probably should have put some popcorn and a couple of bottles of water in there.
Red peppers, some paninis.
Okay, and we took some after that, which I have for you guys, and it's an honor to have them at your home in your memorial. And his mom has ashes, and so we'll just put these in there. I don't know what words to say now. They all say rest in peace, but there's already resting in peace.
Yeah.
Maybe just rest. We put him here so we could come and sit here and be by him.
Do you want me to take that thing so you can use 2 hands?
Yeah, it's okay. They say, it's memory that love lives on in memory. And when I was looking for the stone, I called one of my neighbors to help me. This young guy, very strong, did some work for us. Because I thought I was going to move it myself. And I went down to move it out of the wall, because 10 years ago I built this. I did, and I wouldn't, and I could hardly move it. And I thought, if I try to move this myself, which I know myself enough to know I would have done, I could hear Brett yelling from the grave, "Dad, are you fucking crazy?" Now, this was the decision I didn't fully think through. No. Let me tell you what this decision is. Whether to keep this end, which is thinner, facing out, or that thick end, which will be downhill a little much, facing out. I mean, it's a beautiful stone, but either pointing down the hill rather than pointing up the hill. And that's a thicker face over it.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful to where it is.
Well, it's got to go back a little.
Can you wait until David?
No.
We can help.
I could turn it.
We can help.
Yeah, let me just see first of all, just to turn it. It's not like lifting it. Yes, I can turn it. But this face, look at this one. You see what I mean? That face and this face probably make more sense in a way.
I liked it better the other way.
Okay.
Because now it looks unrooted.
Is that a turtle?
You know?
Yeah.
You sure you're okay doing that?
Yes, yes, I'm not picking the weight of it up. See, just twisting it up. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll set something into here. Not right now, but is there a stone? Maybe I just put off the round. I probably threw it off. Yeah, and that little round one. Yeah, so I'll set it up so it's
Maybe if you turn it a little more to the right, you get to see the striations in the stone, which are so beautiful.
to the right, meaning this way?
Yeah.
Counterclockwise?
Just a little.
Okay.
Can you see them over there? So it's beautiful. Do you want the other stone?
No, that's the mouse good. I'll just show the dirt in there.
Amen.
Amen, Brett. Amen, Brett. Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
With the butterfly thing of his.
It's not a butterfly.
Or bumblebee, is it a hummingbird?
It's a Menardia.
Menadia. It gets butterflies, right?
We'll come get to know it. Yes, it'll attract butterflies.